All right, well, I think we'll get going today. Thanks for joining us here at Sunnyside. We're doing pruning, winter pruning / early spring. Happy trees for winter. Who doesn't want happy trees for winter? Everybody wants happy trees. So I am Trevor Cameron, our general manager here at Sunnyside. Say hi to Nicole. She's back around the show.
Hi.
Thanks, everybody. Hopefully everybody's staying well and safe. And on to the next subject here. So pruning is always an interesting topic. Sometimes I'll speak for our family, the husband and the wife maybe have a little different ideas on how they're going to prune the yard. So hopefully we'll give you some good tips today. There's a lot to cover, I'll say, with pruning. This honestly could be a 10 or 12 part series as we go through different seasons. We'll have lots of time for questions at the end. We're going to go through some basics. I'm going to show you a few slides. We'll show you a couple plants, hopefully teach you some good tips, and then plenty of time for questions because a lot of us gardeners have very similar plants in our yard. I think one person's question is probably going to answer 10 or 15 more that are on the class with us today. So thanks again for coming. If I start just with the basics of kind of how to make a basic pruning cut, the correct cut. So this is a PGA hydrangea I borrowed from the garden here at the nursery. Don't tell Steve. It is quite dormant. The flowers dried. We got a nice frost last night. But it's a great example. If I look at a stem, I could be a branch. I could be the top of the tree. Wherever I'm looking, if I look at a plant on bare wood, I'm always going to see pairs of buds. If I look on that hydrangea, you can see those distinct little pairs of buds that are waiting to say hello in 2021. So if I want to prune this, because it's a hydrangea, I'll tell you, we want to at least deadhead it going into winter. But the reason I brought this particular plant out is because I'm hoping you can see really well. If I'm going to prune this, I want to cut at about a 45-degree angle towards the sky, just above the bud that I want to grow next year. So I cut that one flower off right there. Next year, I have 2 stems come up and I have double the bloom. I'm going to have twice the flower on that hydrangea. But this could be any plant at all, a rose, a tree, whatever you're trying to attack. As long as I follow that principle and cut to the point I want at 45 degrees, I'm going to have a good, healthy bud break, and I'm going to heal. I'm not going to go out and leave stubs, and cut indiscriminately. That's the chainsaw on the stick. We're going to end up with stubs and dead wood poking out everywhere. If you're going to take the time to do it right, get yourself just a ½ inch, an inch above those buds and do it right. I also, you can see what I do there. I made it flat. So what happens in Washington with the amount of rain we get in the winter, I'm taking a chance of water sitting on that stem, and perhaps I have some black or dead wood start down, and maybe I end up killing those buds, and then it grows from here. And then I've got to go back and do it again. So who wants to do twice the work? Let's get it done right the first time. So kind of the basic pruning cut right there. We could talk about types of pruning. You'll see on your list. I hope everybody got the handout. It's on the website. We got it emailed with the class. You can use this for reference. We'll be kind of going back and forth in the handout a little bit today, but you can keep that as a reference because it's a good tool to use for all kinds of different rules and types of pruning. So today we're going to talk more about thinning and heading out and heading back. Pinching and shearing, I'll mention real quick. Pinching back is going to be my herbaceous plants. If I'm growing herbs, if I have annuals, I don't necessarily even need a pair of pruners. Sometimes I can take snips or just my fingers and pinch growth back. So I've got a nicer, fuller plant that's got more flower on it. Shearing, we don't probably do a lot of that right now, but let's just use an example of a boxwood. And I'm going to say, I'm not going to cut this, because one thing we'll talk about here a little later is that we're not going to prune evergreen things back here in the fall. This would wait till spring at this point. But if I have a plant like boxwood, I can take the head shears I brought from my house here, and I can go along and clip this into an ice cube or triangle or globe or whatever your favorite geometric shape is, and I've got a happy plant. The difference is, if you looked at that hydrangea I cut, I had big gaps in between buds. If I look at a boxwood, I've got buds all up and down the stem, so I don't have to sit here for an hour and go, well, I'm going to take one little piece here and one little piece there. If you like to do your Mr. Miyagi Zen thing, feel free. If you've got the time, you can do it by hand. But a head shear will allow me to do that quickly and get a nice full bushy plant without having to spend a whole lot of time. So boxwood, just an example of something we would shear. Again, not now. We would wait till coming out of winter at this point. The two things we'll be covering today more is thinning and heading out. So if I grab a branch, we're not quite dormant yet. We still got some leaves on things. But again, if I'm a maple tree, this is off a Firewheel maple. So I'm standing here and I'm the branch out of my belly. So there's my branch, I'm the trunk. Or again, this could easily be, use it as an example of something upright. If we're going to thin, I'm going to look at the structure of that branch and I'm going to dig in and take little branches all the way out. If I thin this, what happens? I get more air, I get more sun. Can you see the difference already? I took just a couple little branches out. I'm cutting right to the trunk. I'm not just cutting and leaving stubs again. That will heal over nicely, and I've opened up my specimen. I haven't changed the size or the height or the width, but I have opened it up to allow for more air circulation. If I'm going to head back, I'm going to go from the end of the branch, and maybe I take the tip off. That's going to shorten my width or my height if I top it, but it's going to change the direction. So if you look at that branch, I took the tip out, I'm telling that tree to follow this growth line versus heading straight out again. So usually when we head back, we would want to find a spot like that. So you can look at that plant there, it's still going to grow the same direction that I had it before, but I am not gonna have to lose about 2 years of growth. So I've eliminated 2 years of growth, and I can go back and keep this plant a little bit smaller. So again, thinning, I'm going to take a branch out down to the stem and open up the structure. Or if I look at that side piece there, if I'm going to head this back, you know, I could take this all the way back to there and change the direction of that branch or change my height. So those are the two kind of major types we're going to be talking about today for kind of winter / early spring pruning. I will say this as we start, you know, we're not running home today. It doesn't need to be done next week. This is kind of something we kick off the winter here in November and then revisit this class again in January. When you have time this winter, when our deciduous trees are dormant, shrubs, everything else, we can prune, you know, here in the next couple of weeks. We can prune in December, January, February, or March, just before we get into spring 2021. So we'll say a couple things we'll probably wait on, and as we teach you some rules here, you can make a choice kind of when you want to attack the pruning at your place. If I just show you a couple little tools, you know, again, hand pruners. I've got mine in my pocket here. You know, a good sharp pair of hand pruners. We carry Zenport's line, a number of different models. That's a great pruner for the $40 range. Last you for years if you take care of it. That's a good sturdy pair of hand pruners. And then we've got ratchet pruners. If maybe the hand is a little easier where I can click, click, click and prune a branch versus having to squeeze all the way through. Little hand ratchet pruners work very well. Loppers is, I think, a tool most gardeners probably are familiar with. There's large size loppers, and this is one of my favorites. This is the mini vine lopper from Zenport. Much shorter, and I can get into plants a little bit easier and get accurate cuts. Sometimes loppers, you've got to use so much leverage, it's hard to get in and get a really clean cut at the base. But the mini vine loppers tend to work very well. I use my saws more than anything. These are from my garage. We sell both of these. I kind of chuckled when I started seeing this out. This little tiny pocket saw. You'd think, yeah, what would I use that for? It's extremely sharp, and to me, more of a surgical tool. If I'm into the base of shrubs, I need to thin out some branches, eliminate some wood. This is really easy to get in and make very accurate, fine cuts without having to fight maybe a lopper or a different tool. The little hand saws are awesome to use all year long, but especially in the wintertime. So that's the little pocket saw. And then if we've got a little bit larger limb, you know, we've got a regular long one there too that I can fold out, use, and then store when I don't need it as well. So those two I think are very useful. You saw my head shears. You know, I use these on some deciduous plants here. I'll show you a couple, but certainly something. I like these because this model's got extendable handles. So I'm pretty tall, but I can get up a little taller by extending my handles and get a little extra reach out of them. So that's it. That's the pruning shears or head shears. And then I'm going to show you a couple sharpeners, because nothing's worse than dull pruners. If I've got bad pruners, I'm going to mash wood. I'm not going to have clean cuts, taking a chance again for disease or some other issue getting in there. So keeping your pruner sharp is key. This is one of our all-time favorites here, this little sharpener from Zenport. If I have my blade open, I can literally keep this in my pocket and just run this along my blade real quick and sharpen it very, very quickly without having to take it apart, put it on the grinder. As long as I keep these oiled and use my sharpener, there's even got a little cap here, Phil. You can put oil in the end of your sharpener. I'm going to have good pruners for a very long time. A new sharpener I just picked up for us, it just came in last week. It's just a little smaller hand model. This is one maybe I can just keep in my pocket or in my pruner holster, not take up as much room. You've got a ceramic and a carbide blade on the side. So again, if I'm looking for a quick sharpening when I'm out working in my yard, I can just whip this out of my pocket and run this along my blade real quick, and I've got good sharp tools once again. Okay. The last one I'll show you, if you can see in the back, is Mr. Pole Pruner. So I use this a lot. I volunteer down at our Arboretum in Everett, do some pruning of some very large trees. You pay for what you get with all tools, if you ask me, but especially with the pole pruner. I've tried little skinny pulled ones that have rope instead of chain connecting the pruner mechanism. You know, they'll last me a year or two, and then they got to go pitch to the garbage, and I got to go buy another one because the rope breaks or the mechanism goes bad. This is the best one I've seen. It's an expensive tool, but this one will get me up about 14 feet. The pole is much thicker, and I've got chain action on my blade. I can also screw a long curved saw blade on here so I can lay it up in larger branches and get things sawed properly as well. So I know some people may hire, you know, companies or arborists to come out and do some taller tree pruning in their yard, but a lot of times in most landscapes, if you've got a good pole pruner like this is one from Corona that we have at the store for sale, you could sometimes do that work pretty easily yourself as well. Okay. So there's a couple of tools for you. I wanted to just kind of look at one branch. We're not going to make you turn you into botany, give you a botany lesson today, but I think as you decide on different things in your yard, you know, how to prune it, when to prune it, you know, we'll go through knowing our plants here in a minute, but we need to know just a little bit about basic plant growth. So if I take this branch, if I kind of hide behind it, you can see I cut this off of the main trunk this morning. It's still got little leaves left, which is fine, but I could follow the growth pattern. What grew this year? What grew last year? All the way down to that trunk, and I can make my decision on how to prune depending on how my plant grows. This particular plant, this one is called a Cordyolopsis. This blooms out in February, March. It's kind of a winter bloomer. And what we'll talk about here in a minute is old wood versus new wood bloom. This is a plant that blooms on old wood. So why do I have it in my yard? I want to walk out and see a flower coming after the holidays. If I go in this winter and I grab my chainsaw and the stick and butcher this thing back into a ball, yes, it will grow. No, I'm not going to kill it, but I've just cut off almost all my flower buds for that next year. So if I'm going to prune something like this, I'm going to look this time of year at fixing issues, crossing branches, bad angles. Maybe it's hanging out on my driveway. There's lots of reasons to prune it, but I'm not going to necessarily sign up to just go out and cut the whole thing back. So I'm looking at more things like thinning, you know, taking a little piece out here and there. Look at that, little crossing branches gone. Maybe I don't want that clutter at the base there. I've got too many of these at the top. Maybe I want to open that up a little bit. I'm not changing the structure at all, but I'm allowing this little guy to breathe, get more sun, and perhaps be a little happier plant long term. So if you look at your plants like that, trees or shrubs, try to follow that growth pattern. What is primary growth? What grew this year? What grew last year? What grew 3 years ago and into old growth? Because that's going to help us make some pruning decisions on particular plants we have in our yard, okay? So as I mentioned, old versus new wood. You know, if you think of things that most of us in the Northwest have in our yards, you know, take a dogwood tree, for example. Yes, it's deciduous. We're losing our leaves right now, turning color. I'm telling you to watch on pruning deciduous things here in the winter. It's not going to hurt the dogwood to go back and prune it and thin it and do all those things. But if I go out in the winter and I head it back and cut my dogwood tree back, I've probably removed all of my flower buds that I would get to enjoy that next April, May, June, whenever yours blooms. Magnolia, same idea. You know, I brought one in here. I'll have to hide behind it because it's a tall one, but this is a star magnolia. And if you can see, you know, what do I have at the tips of all these branches? If I remove a couple leaves because they're fallen, I've got those little fuzzy buds sitting there right now, ready to go for next February flower. So the whole point to me of having a magnolia in my garden is I want to enjoy the flower the next year. This is another plant that blooms on 1-year-old wood. So if I go cut it back late in the summer or I cut it here in the winter, I've removed all my flowering and I'll have to skip a year of bloom. So if I take a tree like this, again, broken branches, disease, anything I might want to get rid of, if you can watch me here, I'm going to dig more in the middle and I'm going to try to thin this tree out. I'm going to remove branches that are crossing over each other. I'm going to try to open up the shape. Yes, maybe I remove a couple flower buds here and there, but I'm not going in and heading this back, which is going to essentially cut the majority of my bloom out for 2021. So if I just go through and do a little bit of thinning, you know, maybe I want to limb it up and get it off the ground a little bit. All those are good things to do here in the winter without having the temptation to come in here. You can see my pruners and just start cutting back branches. I lose my flower and I'm going to have frankly, a little bit of a twiggy mess come springtime. Okay. So plants that bloom on old wood, we mentioned dogwood, magnolia. You know, think of some of the early, you know, kind of harbingers of spring. We have forsythias around here and quinces, all kinds of really cool shrubs that I would expect to flower January, February, March. If I go out in the winter and I cut those back, again, I'm not going to kill my plant, but I've killed my flowering for a season. So I'm going to let those guys bloom and then attack my pruning after flower. Correct crossing branches, broken things, bad angles, shape, you know, all that's fine, but I'm not going to try to cut back or rejuvenate something here in the winter that blooms on old wood. If I look at maybe some plants that bloom on new wood, you know, an easy one's a rose. You know, I can cut my rose back here in the fall. We want to get them back to about hip high. In spring, we could even go a little farther back. You know, usually Veterans Day to 1st of December is my time for fall rose, and then President's Weekend to 1st of March in spring. But I can cut my rose back, clean it up, and not worry about losing all my flower power come 2021. That's a plant that would bloom on new growth each season. If I take an easy shrub like spirea, you know, here's one in a pot. I've got some big ones of these in my yard, probably maybe too low. I have my platform too low. But if I take this, you know, it's almost dormant. My leaves are turning color just like at my house. I've got my dried flower heads here. If I go in, I could do this in 2 weeks. I could do it all the way till the 1st of March. I could take my hedge clippers and just round these twigs off into whatever height and shape I want to start the year off. And this always blooms on fresh wood for the year. So I do no sacrificing of bloom, and I cut down my yard work a little bit by knowing what plants I can get away with shearing. So a plant like spirea, if we look at things like potentilla, I mentioned the rose, there's lots of them. We'll have time for questions after class where you might bring up something you're wondering in your yard. That's an easy one to answer. To me, if we kind of move on to the next subject, would be reasons to prune. You know, there's no, you know, gardening Bible that says, hey, you got to go out in your yard in the winter and you have to prune every single thing you have in your landscape. That's not what this class is about. You know, to me, it's about having a reason. What am I trying to do by pruning? Am I trying to encourage new growth? Am I removing diseased wood, dead wood? I want to increase my fruit, my flower, my berry. You know, is the neighbor's lawyer threatening to sue me because my tree is now blocking their $1 million view? I mean, there's a lot of reasons to go out there and do some pruning in the winter, but to me, it's always have a purpose. You know, that would be kind of my number one rule is have a purpose. Why am I out here doing this? Because of this reason. So think of it that way. You know, I mentioned knowing our plants. You know, to me, the easiest rules to teach you are pruning after bloom. I mean, I swear by that 99.9% of the time. And we could go through everything in your yard. And if you get to enjoy, you know, your rhododendron flowering, you know, every spring, that is a plant that set its flower buds last summer. They sit there all winter saying spring's coming, spring's coming. And then here we go next in 2021, I get to enjoy my flower. If I let it bloom, I could cut it back and do whatever I want to it. Now we grow up, we set our flower buds, and then I'm good to go for the next season as well. If I go out in late summer and fall and winter and I cut my rhododendron back, yes, perhaps I don't kill it. You know, it's not the ideal time to prune evergreens anyway, but I probably don't kill it, but I have removed my flower potential for the next spring. And with me, I love rhodies. When they bloom in spring, I want that to enjoy the flower. I don't want to watch it skip one season. So things like rhododendron, forsythia we mentioned, we did dogwood. I mean, on and on. If I know my yard and I know my plants and I know that they spent the entire year, excuse me, or the summer setting their flower buds that I get to enjoy next year as a gardener, then I'm going to leave that little guy alone over the winter and prune after bloom. That's a great rule to remember. The second one to me is the 1/3 rule. Yes, I break it. I'm sure most gardeners have broken it on occasion. Sometimes we can get away with it depending on the plant, but I am always safe if I look out at an old plant in my yard and I want to go down 1/3 in height or 1/3 in spread. With deciduous plants, not evergreens, we got to be more careful. So I'm just talking about deciduous things that lose their leaves in the winter. I'm going to be safe. Yes, some things you can get away with more. I will sign my name up. We bought our house, you know, butchered 10-foot rhodies down to 1 foot tall to see how they came back. Some of them came back great, still got them. Other ones, compost heap in the sky, and you get replaced by a little smaller specimen. So remember that 1/3 rule. That's always a good one to live by with pruning as well, okay? If we talk just a couple of kind of side subjects, you know, removing large limbs. You know, in the wintertime, we've gotten some wind, we've got some rain already, you know, that continues here in the winter. If I have a broken limb or I want to, you know, limb my tree up off my garden so the rest of my perennials and shrubs can breathe a little bit, I want to be very careful when I'm doing large limbs. If I take my saw, hopefully I won't cut my arm, and I walk out and I've got a large limb sticking out and I start sawing, what's going to happen? That limb is going to crack, split, and peel, and I'm probably going to rip my bark and do some damage. So when you're cutting large limbs, whether you've got saw or you want to do the chainsaw massacre, you know, I take that limb out, I want to cut up from underneath and make a notch, then flip it over and cut the limb. Now it will break off clean, and then I can always go back and get that cut right nice and tidy to the collar where the bark is. Then I heal. I don't have to worry again about disease or dead stubs or other issues down the road. I can't tell you how many times I've seen neighbors walk out and honestly do the right thing by taking a broken or dead limb out of their tree, you know, fire up the chainsaw, cut from the top, and then you hear the snap, the crackle, the pop, and then boom, here goes a big piece of bark off the trunk, and now we've got some issues with that as well. So try to always go up first and then cut down from the top. Limbing plants up is the same idea. I want to breathe, you know, whether it's up in the tree or down low. It's a great way to kind of let your maples and other plants get up over your garden. So I've got some air and some sun. And with every class that I teach most, I always recommend right plant in the right place. You know, I'm sorry if you bought a house and you get home every night and the Western red cedar has been 3 feet from the front door. You know, that plant should not be planted there. Right plant in the right place is going to cut down your pruning. You know, none of us want to sign up for extra work. And if you have to go out and butcher something back into a ball every year, might not be the right plant for the right place. I mean, there are certain things we do that with, trees and large shrubs, we don't. I mean, I would always rather have a nice specimen develop its beautiful natural shape, help it do that with some directional heading back and thinning for plant health, but not sit and have to cut it into a little ball. You know, look for a different plant, different variety, something that's more suited to that same space will honestly cut down your pruning needs a little bit. So if we just talk a few things, a few more things of kind of what I would be looking to do in winter. Again, to reiterate, I want deciduous plants. I'm looking at structure because I don't have any leaves, and I can see what issues I have with angles and crossing branches and this and that. That's what I'm looking to do in the wintertime. You know, a good example would be lace leaf maple. I think a lot of us have, you know, our little weeping mountain maples. That is one plant I will tell you from being a maple addict for 40 years. You've got to do it in the winter. If you have lace leaves, you know what I mean. I walk out in the summer and I've got a big, thick umbrella of foliage. There is no way you're going to be able to get in there and prune where you need to. You're going to guess, and you're going to have to go back and fix it again. So if I borrowed a little piece from a lace leaf this morning, you know, again, if I'm trunk and I'm hanging down, if I look at that branch, you know, again, if I want to shorten it up, I'm not just going to go along and cut everywhere. I'm going to try to pick somewhere. You can see right there, you know, I got rid of some growth, but I've also left this perfectly angled branch that will do exactly the same thing as it was doing before. So I haven't ruined my shape. I will have the same structure, but I've cut back a year or two of growth, and now I can kind of play that game where I can grow and it won't get too big. So if I'm going to head it back, you know, I'm going to look for places like that where I can cut back to a branch that already exists. And frankly, if I walked out in spring, you know, I just cut half that branch off. You could tell I pruned it a little bit, but if I walk out in spring, you wouldn't tell this plant got pruned at all. So I've got heading back, and if I want to open it up, I can take some little pieces out for thinning as well. You know, then I've got, again, more light, more air. I love lace leaf maples with some character. They're almost art pieces. So I spend a lot more time thinning on those. But this is one to me, you got to get done in the winter. I mean, I pick a day where the sky's not so gray, strap on the rain pants, and usually climb up underneath it, look up through the branching to the sky, and you typically will find so much dead wood. If you look at that wood and you touch it, snaps out, snaps out. I bet you haven't done your lace leaf for a number of years. You walk out this winter, you would probably get rid of 80% of your issue just by taking out all the dead wood. It's not a disease. It's just the natural process of plant growth. I'm going to grow over myself every year on something weeping. I got to get all that dead wood out underneath. I'll have air, I'll have sun, and I'll have a much more attractive looking plant. So try to get your lace leaves done. I mentioned roses. You know, always try to get to hip high in the fall. I know it's tempting. Some of mine still got blooms on them, for goodness sakes. I'm not going to run maybe home and do it today again, but at some point here before winter, I want to get that plant down to hip level so I don't have to worry about breaking canes, wind, snow. Then I can go back and revisit it in that mid to late February time frame and get it cut back to start the season off. So the rose is another good one to worry about here in the winter. I showed you hydrangea. We did the PG hydrangea. So if you have hydrangeas with the big cone flowers like that, again, knowing the plants in my yard, the PG hydrangeas are always new wood bloomers. I could cut this all the way down towards the base of the plant, and I would still grow up next year and get my flowers. So PG hydrangeas are always a little easier. If I have mop head or the round hydrangeas, to be honest with you, all I want to do here going into winter is cut these dead flowers off and probably walk away, you know, leave that guy alone here for the winter. Then I'm going to walk out next March. All these leaves will melt, turn yellow, drop off, and I've got stems back. Now I can look the same principle. I've got pairs of buds. I could leave this alone. I could go down another bud or two perhaps, but I have to be careful on hydrangeas because some of these mop head or round flowered ones bloom on new wood and old wood, or just old wood. So you have to know your variety. This one I know for a fact is old glowing embers. If I cut this plant back, it won't kill it. It'll still grow, but I'm going to have zero flower next summer. I have to leave the wood on these old wood blooming hydrangeas. If this is a new one, like Endless Summer, there's a zillion different trade names out there for good new hybrid hydrangeas. I can do whatever I want and I will still get the bloom. So again, choosing the right plant to start with will help you with your pruning. But if you're not sure what you have on something like this, you should try cutting it back maybe that next summer no bloom. Well, then, you know, as a gardener, I can't do that. I've got to go and just prune a little bit or move it somewhere else and get a new variety that I can keep a little bit smaller. Okay. So hydrangea is another one. Again, I kind of started by, you know, bringing out the boxwood out here. And I just want to say this like 5 times so everyone hears: don't prune broadleaf evergreens. If you were here, I'd make you repeat after me. But we're not going to walk out and prune back our laurels, our boxwoods, our rhodies, our azaleas. You know, yeah, who knows what the winter is going to do. If we get cold, you will do some damage. But the basic principle of pruning is I want to cut it back to encourage new growth. And we do not want new growth here in the winter. We want that come springtime. So if you haven't gotten to it, don't worry about it. Let's wait till A, it blooms in spring, then prune it. Or B, you know, mid-March or so, I can walk out and start clipping my boxwood hedge. I could cut my laurel back. I can do a lot of those broadleaf things that would be a little safer coming out of winter. I've got warm weather, boom, new leaves come out and off we go. I've got a much better looking plant, okay? You certainly, someone's gonna inevitably ask me here in a minute some questions on fruit trees and berries. And I certainly don't want to answer them today, but I would not be running out and doing fruit and berries just yet. You know, that's a specific kind of niche pruning topic that we would cover specifically at the fruit tree class and at the berry class in January to mid-February. So mark your calendar. In 2021, our schedule is pretty much finalized here. We're ready to go for those special subjects come springtime. Certainly, if you want to ask today, I'll do a quick lesson, but it's easier with me, with fruit in particular, to bring a big branch in here and show you kind of the anatomy of a fruit branch and where you want to prune and where you're going to get bloom and where you're going to get fruit. And it's a little hard to explain to you. You can probably look online and find some fruit tree diagram pictures, but we'll talk about that in a little different class. If you want, what time is it here? I'm going to just share my screen for a second here, if I can, and I'm going to show you just a couple diagrams, because some of us are visual learners. Just one second. Some of us are kind of visual learners, and this might help you with you'll find these slides up if you want to watch the recording, but there's your basic hand pruner, ratchet pruner, a good pair of loppers there, and there's the head of that pole pruner I was talking about with the chain versus the rope. That's much more durable. You've got kind of a long reach pruner. We've got some of those here at the store as well. And the head shears. And then there's your sharpener. It's a little review to remind you of the 4 types of pruning there: pinching back, annuals and perennials, things with soft stems, shearing back, things like boxwoods, and then thinning up, opening up structure, air, sun, health, lots of good reasons. I'm a big fan of thinning plants out versus heading back a lot. And then heading back is where we would get to our directional pruning, you know, for heights, for spreads. Do I want to change the angle of my plant, or keep it? Diagrams here real quick. That kind of gives you the anatomy of the branches. Maybe you couldn't see as well with me holding it here in the classroom, but you can kind of go back and visit these diagrams to say, oh, that's what a central leader is. There's a terminal bud. There's a spur. There's a water sprout. There's all kinds of fancy schmancy vocabulary on there, but that's a good basic diagram that you can look at to say, what's going to happen if I cut here or cut there? How's the plant going to respond? Okay. There's a great close-up of kind of how we started making a basic pruning cut. I'm not a big fan. You'll see on the right, the website I found this picture years ago. You'll see that opposite bud, you know, that's a hydrangea right there. I would not leave it flat. I would still leave it 45 degrees, but you can see what happens if I cut too close to a bud. That will not grow, and I'm going to have that next set take over my growth. So I'm going to be real careful to always leave that short little stub above the bud I want and angle 45 degrees so that I don't have the water on there. If you kind of look at those 2 diagrams, that's a great tree diagram on the left there, if you ask me. If you walk in your yard and you've got a shade maple, a Japanese maple, a big birch, any kind of tree, when the leaves are gone here in the winter, look up at the structure and look at the difference between just thinning out a little bit of branching after on the one on the right. I haven't changed the shape. I haven't topped it. I haven't ruined it. I haven't butchered it because I see a lot of butchered trees around. I've opened up the structure and I've got sun, I've got air, I've got a much happier plant that's going to be more attractive in my yard. So that's your thinning. If I look on the right, maybe think of that maybe as a fruit tree. I don't want necessarily spreading crown. If I head back some of those leaders and change the direction, I can keep that shape going that I want in my yard, again, without having to let it get so big. You can see the large limb, just to kind of show you a diagram. You can see taking a big cut. I want to cut, and I just chop that off from top to bottom. I'm probably going to do some damage to the bark. So that's a great way to think of your kind of removing a large limb. Lots of plants up here in multi-stem. Maybe think of our easy one, a Northwest native vine maple. Yes, it's a large shrub, small tree, lilac, forsythia, taller barberries. I can go on and on, different types of what we would call multi-stem shrubs. I can get in, you can see by the wood and light color there, that's how I would try to prune. It's not so much, again, pruning it into a ball, although you certainly can if that's your thing. I want that plant to get its natural structure, do what it wants to do, but I'm going to attack it at the base, and I'm going to try to get rid of crowded stems, extra wood I don't want, and open up that structure. So that's a great little diagram, I think, to kind of show you, again, before and after. If I look at kind of the tree issue, everything in a nutshell is there. This is kind of like that one we saw a few years ago, but that shows you, again, a broken limb. I've got bad crotch angles. I've got suckers, water sprouts. I'm looking at dead wood. It's a real easy time of year to look up and see an old dead wood limb that I need to thin out. Whether you have, maybe an arborist come and get it if it's 50 feet tall, perhaps that's the wiser move. If it's a smaller tree or, a little bit younger one, you could certainly dig in with a pole pruner, a couple of easy little hand saws and a safe ladder, and get in there and do some of this pretty quickly yourself. Again, I'm looking at taking things all the way out to the trunk to open up that whole structure of the tree and get rid of the issues that I have going. And then again, just you can go back and visit there. There's those rules that I would try to make sure you remember. The 1/3 rule, the prune after bloom rule, having a purpose. And then what I want to do here in the winter is attack the structure issues. I want to make sure I'm ready to go for spring. I can always go back and do some thinning in the summer. We cover that in our June pruning class here. But I want to make sure, again, I'm avoiding pruning evergreens this time of year. I want to wait and do that until we're coming out of winter at this point, okay? One thing we'll talk about here with the slide up is dormant spraying. And, we've got this here at the store. This is kind of our go-to mix. If you look at those two products by Monterey, horticultural oil is OMRI listed. So that's 100% organic, certified. Liquid cop is a copper fungicide. It's considered natural. It doesn't have carbon, so they can't consider it organic. But those are two very safe sprays. The only issue with copper is groundwater. If you live right on a stream, the lake, the sound, you probably want to avoid the copper a little bit or use it very sparingly. But in most yards, that doesn't have any kind of soil residual or murder, death, kill, poison long term. We like those two as a dormant spray because I can mix them in the same sprayer. I can apply them at the same time. I don't have to do it twice. And I've essentially covered my full spectrum from bugs to disease in the winter. Now, again, kind of like the pruning, I remember growing up, my dad, at the farm, we would have, you got to spray the whole property every single winter. That's the way it's done. That's not what I'm telling you to do, but what I would try to think of is your garden this past year. Did you fight, scab on your apple, peach leaf curl, lilac blight, any issue you had in the garden with bug or disease? those are the things that I would look to get out there and get pruned so they're open and more airy here. And then after I'm done pruning, immediately get this kind of dormant spray on there, whether I do it in December and January and February, you know, I don't care. It's up to you, but it's a great way to kind of start out clean for the season and get you going for 2021. I like both these as well, because if you read the label, I can use these two products any time of the year, as long as it's not 90 degrees. And yes, 90 degrees sounds pretty good today because it froze last night, but I think we could probably count the number of days it was 90 on one hand. You know, you avoid August and maybe a little bit of July. You can use those almost all year. So there's just a couple of quick slides to kind of show you. I just wanted to maybe, again, I'm kind of a visual learner. I like to see something and it could maybe tell a little better. You can go back and look at some of those diagrams online, okay? So before we get some questions going, I just wanted to mention, you know, with always at the classes here, we've always got great sales going. So you've got starting today all the way through next Friday. You stop up here. We've got a great supply. Just reloaded the pruning supplies in the store. You got 20% off anything to do with pruning. So the hand pruners, the saws, the sharpeners, pole pruners, any of that will be 20% off. Both those dormant sprays, the liquid cop and the hort oil, we have plenty. Those are 20% off as well if you want to kind of stock up and have those ready to go to use whenever you can get to it this winter. And the last thing is, one of my favorite pairs of gloves. I always get these in every winter. This is Wonder Grip. I think they're up to 15 bucks this year, but for the class you get them for 12. These come in small, medium, large, extra large, and for people like me, XXL even. We've got some big ones. This is insulated, so they're very warm when it's cold out, and they're also fully coated with latex, so pretty good waterproof. When it gets cold here, I'm a pretty hardy guy working at a nursery, but at some point in January and I want to go out and do some work, these are my gloves of choice. I think they're a little bit warmer and they will keep you dry even on a wet day. So those are on special as well. Tomorrow, I'll be doing hellebores. If you want to join me at 11 a.m., we're going to talk about, we call them Christmas roses, Lenten roses, but we'll be doing a little talk on hellebores tomorrow if you want to join us at 11. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nicole because it's question time. I'm sure we got lots of good questions coming.
We do have lots of questions today, so I'm going to do my best to keep up with all of them. And I know that there's lots of different varieties and topics of questions, so we're going to do our best to go through all of these today. If for some reason you have to leave early, don't worry, we're recording this and it'll be posted up on our website on our classes page either later today or tomorrow. You can also subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you get faster notifications of when things go up. So I'm gonna do my best to kind of organize things, but we might bounce around a little bit. So people were asking before we go very far about some of the tools. Can you talk about maintenance, and are there sharpeners for pruners?
Yep. Well, the two, we'll start with sharpening. So the two sharpeners again that I carry is this is a KS06, fancy name, but this is a great little sharpener from Zenport. I can put oil in my cap. It's got a brush to apply if it's out raining. But if I literally open up any pair of hand pruners, loppers, head shears, any blade, frankly, my wife stole my first pair. They're in the kitchen. She uses them for knives and cleavers too. I can take this and very quickly run it over my blade to keep my pruner sharp. I'm trying this one because I think it's very small. If you can tell, I can put that in my pocket. This has got a ceramic side and also a tungsten side. And again, I can run that along my blades and sharpen very, very quickly. Yes, I would have one of those around. If you want my, kind of tool maintenance schedule, pulling them apart is awesome, and cleaning them and oiling them. I do that one time a year. So at some point here in the winter, on a gray, rainy day, we'll get the grinder out, set some towels out. I use 3-in-1 oil, and I'll lube all my joints, my blades, sometimes grind the blades a little bit if they're really dull. I haven't had to do that for a couple years, to be honest, but oiling is huge. If you just get a little can of the 3-in-1 oil or mineral oil, there's lots of choices that I can dab, on my joints, my blades. You'll keep the rust down, keep the pruners happy. unless you're like me and you leave them in your yard waste once in a while, then they're kind of hard to get back. But easy maintenance, a little bit of oil and keep them sharp.
What's the ceramic blade on the little sharpener for?
Just two different styles. Sometimes some different types of blades. You'd use a ceramic tip or tungsten. They both will work. In my experience, the ceramic probably wears out a little bit faster than the tungsten, but you could use either one. I would probably, for me in past years, ceramic maybe on a wider blade, like a head shear blade, a little bit easier, or the steel I would use more on my lopper or my anvil or my regular bypass pruners.
I know you talked a little bit about forsythia, but can you just briefly tell us again when's the right time to prune that?
Yeah, forsythia is one of those examples of, again, prune after bloom. The reason I have forsythia in my yard is that's got glorious yellow flowers right at the end of winter. If I go out and prune it now or next month or January, I'm going to cut all my flower buds off because those were all produced on last year's wood. So forsythia, easiest answer is let it bloom, and honestly, you could do whatever you want to that. You could break my 1/3 rule with forsythia. If it blooms out on all those stems, right when it's done blooming, I could cut that back however far I want, and up it comes again. All that growth that summer sets flower buds that I get to enjoy the next season. So wait till, I would guess on a typical spring around here, you're probably in that mid-March, mid-April time frame when it's done blooming, and then have at it.
What about, I know, again, you talked about a lot of this. We're going to kind of just do brief, callbacks to it. So what about hydrangeas? When should you prune them, basically?
Well, again, in my experience, I don't like to cut back my hydrangeas all the way in the fall. So all I do here in the fall is I remove the spent flowers. I don't want that weight sitting on the tips of the stems, snow, wind. I don't want anything broken. So I will just simply snip off all the dried flowers and leave it alone. I would walk out there the 1st of March, come spring 2021. That's when I would choose how far I want to cut it back. Now, hydrangea is a tough one. I don't want to confuse anybody, but that's the issue. We talked about old wood bloom, new wood bloom. I would have to know what hydrangea you have to give you specific advice. But if you think of the big cone-shaped flowers, those are PG hydrangeas. Those always bloom on new wood. You could cut however much you want off, and you're fine for flowering. If I have round flower, that's where the gray area is. The old-fashioned ones, Nico Blue, Glowing Embers, I could go on and on. If I cut those down, it'll always grow. It's not going to kill your plant, but I'm not going to get a lot of flowering that next summer. If you have a new generation type hydrangea like Endless Summer, there's a Let's Dance series, there's a zillion varieties of new wood bloomers. Now I can do whatever I want in March. I can cut it down farther if I want a smaller plant. I can leave it alone if I want a bigger one. That would be up to you, and I would immediately get the flowering reward again that summer.
What about the snowball hydrangeas?
Snowball, so I'm guessing their snowball bush is viburnum. That's a little different. I'm guessing they mean like the arborescens, the big round white flowered ones. Those would bloom on a little bit of old wood again. So make sure we don't cut those too far back. Cutting down a stem or two is fine, but I'm not going to take that down towards the ground. Again, it will always grow, but I won't get much flowering that next year.
Back to the tool maintenance real quick. Somebody asked, what's the brand again for the small sharpener?
We carry all Zenport. Everybody probably knows the Felco brand. That's the creme de la creme for hand pruners. You're going to spend $100 on a nice pair of Felcos. As long as put them in the yard waste, they'll last you a lifetime. The Zenport is kind of the knockoff. Think of it, maybe it's like the Rolex and the Timex. Both work great. If I'm out in a typical homeowner yard, buying Zenport is going to probably last me a lifetime because I'm not using it day after day like perhaps I do here at work, at home, and doing pruning down the arboretum. So Zenport is the brand on almost everything we carry. That's the sharpener, hand pruners. We do have some Felcos and some other things mixed in, but your sharpeners would be Zenport for sure.
And do you need to disinfect your pruners in between tree cuttings?
That is a great question because I always debate whether or not to put that topic in. we're in the time of sterilization of everything, I think, right now. So sterilizing your pruners is a great idea. I don't think you have to do it all the time, but honestly, if I had any doubt in my mind at all that I was pruning something with a disease in the wood, absolutely, my saw, my pruner, my lopper, whatever it is, rubbing alcohol, little bit of bleach solution, something just to disinfect the pathogens on there would be the safe way to go. I think you could probably waste your time, honestly, and go to the other extreme. It's never going to hurt, but if you have an issue and you prune that tree, absolutely go sterilize those before you go touch another plant. Because if we get to something like, what would be a good example, like verticillium wilt, that's a common issue we have in our soil up here in the wet winters that attacks a lot of plants. If I got a Japanese maple and it's got verticillium wilt, and maybe you bring me a piece and I tell you that's what you got, it's going to die at some point. There's no cure. But if I go out and saw that thing down, and then I go take my blade and I go saw another Japanese maple, you just helped move that pathogen from tree to tree to tree.
Excellent. What's the ceramic side of the sharpener used for versus the tungsten?
Well, like you said a minute ago, the ceramic, it's just two different sharpening tools. The ceramic's very hard as well. I probably tend to use more of a ceramic on a wider blade, like my head shear, maybe a little bit more, and one with the tip, again, like a regular bypass pruner, I can run this type of pruner along there very easily, or sharpener, or I can take that and again run my metal side on that. The ceramic will certainly help sharpen it as well, but I would tend to use the ceramic more on a hedge blade. I get a little bit wider berth on there and I can keep those head shear blades a little sharper.
Excellent. We have a lot of questions about lilacs. So maybe you can briefly dive into that.
Lilacs is a great plant. I've got 3 or 4 20-footers in my yard that I love, the small trees. That's a great one of those examples of old bloom. If you walked out right now and you looked at all the tips of your growth on your lilac, you're going to see those little green buds sitting there. That is your flower that you're going to walk around and smell next May. So again, if I walk out in the winter and I head back and I cut all my branches back, say goodbye to your flowers for 2021. And the reason I want lilac in my yard, enjoy the bloom, walk out in the yard, smell it everywhere, and I'm good to go. So my recommendation would be to, again, prune after bloom. That's a great rule for all that stuff. Again, the winter, walking out, removing a sucker, opening up the structure, getting rid of a crossy branch, absolutely do all that here in the winter. I do as well. But if I want to keep that lilac down in growth, I want to prune it after bloom and then allow the summer for it to regrow, set flower buds, and then I have the maximum flower again for the next spring.
Do you have any tips on how to tell what's new wood blooming versus old wood blooming if you don't know offhand?
You can find probably a lot of that information on the net, or certainly, send me a picture of your plant, call, whatever, come down. I could tell you right off the bat, yeah, you're okay pruning that all you want. This one you want to leave alone till after bloom. If you're not sure, I would always kind of assume old wood bloom. There's probably a lot more common plants that we utilize as gardeners here that bloom on last year's growth that I want to wait for them to bloom before I prune versus ones I can get away with cutting back. Again, you're never gonna, hardly ever are you going to lose the plant by pruning it. So if you want to kind of garden trial by error, at some point somebody did it, and that's how we know the answer now. You could walk out and cut something back here in the winter. Next spring, you're like, well, wait a minute, I walk out every single May and that little guy's blooming. What happened? Oh, I cut it back. So I must know now I've got an old wood blooming plant.
I know we kind of talked about this. There's lots of questions about fruit trees. And just like you mentioned, we've been talking in the chat about the fruit tree specific class that's coming up, beginning of 2021, that'll help really dive into this topic. But there's some questions in terms of what what month or time frame do you want to prune for either yourself or to have somebody come out and prune your trees for you?
Well, again, we try to time these seminars here at the nursery for all these years at the proper time of year for you. I would always personally lean towards later winter for pruning my edible stuff. Yes, if, say you're a snowbird and you head down to Arizona and I'll see you in mid-April, it's probably not the end of the world if you want to get out and get some of this done here in December after we go dormant. You're probably still too early on it now. Sap is still flowing a little bit. It's always that January, February time frame to me, and that would be fruit trees, thinning out my blueberries, thinning out my raspberry rows. That's why we tend to probably talk those specifics on pruning at that time of year, because I would rather have you kind of bolster the pruner on the fruit tree here until we get to the end of winter. And then again, mid-January, late January, mid-February, end of February, anytime in there before we bloom is ideal. Part of it's that. The other part is, again, it's probably the hardest thing for me to stand here and go, well, hey, you know what? Too long to take your fruit tree and cut it here and cut it there. Looking at branches, which I bring in for that class, is key. You could probably jump online, fruit tree, apple branch, anatomy or whatever you'll come up with a great picture that you could look at. The mistake with most people with fruit in particular is they either A, prune too hard, B, end up cutting off all their spurs or fruit production wood, and then you get nothing for the season. So it's one I would always be a little careful of. And again, I would recommend you joining us that late January to mid-February time. We'll have fruit tree class going hard, and we will have the berry class as well. We will cover both those topics.
You're gonna talk about espalier, columnar, like all the different kinds of fruit trees, right?
Yeah, espalier. In fact, if I obviously I think we would all agree that the COVID situation is not going to end miraculously this winter, although I hope it does. We usually would have you guys down here for these classes. If you're especially with the espalier, we've got two beautiful pear espaliers here at the nursery in our gardens. Stop by sometime, come down and I'll go give you a quick little kind of demo. Typically at that class, when folks are down here, and some years if it's not raining so hard in January, we walk out to the espalier and I jump up on the ledge and say, okay, this is how we want to do it. I mean, espalier is essentially bonsai, a fruit tree. You're almost going torture style because you want to maximize production on a very small plant. You could get a bazillion apples or pears on espalier if you prune it right and not let it ever turn into a monstrous tree.
Would dormant spray on fruit trees, would that coincide with the same time as pruning? When do you want to do dormant sprays?
Well, again, for me as a gardener, I mean, I'll tell you what I do in my yard. If I had a disease issue this summer, this fall, whatever it was, and I haven't, and I don't want it back, as soon as we go dormant here, I'm going to get it sprayed. I want shields up, so to speak, here for the winter. The copper I mentioned, the liquid cop, lasts for about 30 days. If I spray that on there on a dry day and it dries onto the woods, the buds, everything, I've got a shield up there in 30 days. All these diseases are blowing around in the wind, the rain, and once they land somewhere and find a spot they can propagate, that's when we get the issue. So if I can get that spray on there, maybe here in December, then I'm good to go. And I will just make sure that I get it sprayed before it blooms in the spring, whenever that is, and then I will let it bloom, let the bees do their thing. We would call it petal drop. I walk out maybe a month later on my lawn or my garden, I've got all the little apple petals that have fallen. The bees have pollinated it. Now, as soon as I see that fruit starting to develop there, I can get another spray on. And in our, climate, that's why, again, I like the liquid cop and the hort oil. With the cool, wet weather we have every single spring until summer, I'm trying to get out there once a month. If I've got a peach tree and I don't want peach leaf curl, you've got to spray that thing, once a month in the growing season here in spring. If you don't, probably not going to kill your tree, but you're going to bring me a sample like 1,000 other people do in March and April and May and say, what's wrong with my peach? It's all curly and stippled. If I spray with that copper, I probably eliminate a lot of that problem.
Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So what about shrubs and trees that you want to help leave food for the insects and birds over the winter? Are there?
Yeah, there's lots of things that frankly I won't touch much at all. I've got twig dogwoods in my yard. They've got full berry clusters on them right now to keep the birds happy. I don't cut down all my perennials because again, a lot of the flowers have dried to seeds, and yes, they may self-sow and propagate, but the birds, I said juncos and chickadees and everybody's out there pecking away in my butterfly garden, eating all those little seeds off the ground right now. There's a lot of the plants. If I've got a berry, a berry on that over the winter for wildlife, absolutely. You don't need to run out and do it this week. Wait till the end of winter. At some point this winter, they either all get eaten or B, they drop, and then I can go ahead and do my thinning and shaping, and I'm ready to go for the next year as well.
Would there be any benefit to leaving blooms on hydrangeas as opposed to pruning them?
Again, most winters, it probably wouldn't matter, but for me, kind of OCD pruner, I don't like to look out and see the flowers when they're brown, and I worry about we get a heavy snow plus wind. That's a little bit of weight sitting on that stem, and you'll probably see them start to lean and split a little bit or break. That's my one thing in the fall, is just try to deadhead just the flowers, and then come springtime, you can go ahead and cut back your wood and do your thing in March.
And what about if you were going to transplant a hydrangea? Do you want to transplant it before or after pruning? Basically, if it's going from the container into the ground.
Oh, if it was me, if you've had it in a pot for a while, and it's been growing in the pot for a while, I'd probably transplant it as is. If you're taking one home or you bought one that hasn't gotten the ground yet, I do that all the time too. And you want to plant it now. Again, I wouldn't cut the stems back, deadhead the flowers, but don't cut the stems back. If we get super cold, you may lose some wood on those if you open it up, and then I just have to go back and do it again. I would rather have you just spend the one-time pruning, deadhead the flowers, wait until spring. You can walk out on those stems and see where all the leaves are coming out and go, oh, let's just go to here and here and there and there, and then I've got the nice shrub that I want.
Jumping a little bit, I know you talked about roses a little bit and pruning those. What's the reason behind cutting them both in the fall and the spring? Can you just do it once?
Well, yeah, again, to me, it's a little bit like the hydrangea. I should qualify the rose discussion by saying, if you have a climbing rose and you're trying to grow up an arbor or a wall or trellis, we're not talking about cutting those back to the hip high. You want to build wood, so you've covered your structure. This would be for shrub rose, hybrid tea rose, grandiflora, floribunda, all the other types. Is it, excuse me, is it the end of the world? If we don't do it till February, probably not. As long as you do it one or the other. My feeling is a lot of times folks or gardeners remember to do it in the fall, and in February, they don't think much about going out and cleaning up the old rows, because you don't want any leaves going into the next season. And I want to remove, everything, say, thinner than a pencil. I want to open up that rose. You want to have that open center with all those canes coming out. I want air, I want sun, and I don't want to fight disease. So if I can get that wood thinned out, probably again, more February than November. The first prune at Veterans Day here, if you haven't done it, that's again, I don't want it breaking. Maybe it's too tall. I just don't want anything breaking in the winter, whether it's snow or wind or whatever. I want to get it down to a comfortable height. Maybe it's not, hip high for everybody. And then I can go and finish it off come springtime.
And would this be the same if you've got some roses that are fairly small or skinny? Would you still prune them the same way as something that's more established and fuller?
If they're pretty young, again, if they're not huge and bushy and tall, there's no reason you have to go out and do them. If they're younger roses and you've got a nice structure, don't worry about it. Maybe you go more into the middle and just do a little bit of thinning just to open up again, a little bit of air, a little bit of sun. I'll use me as an example. I've had hybrid tea, grandiflora. Then I got married late in life and got kids, and I don't have time to take care of my prized roses anymore. So I went to shrub roses, for the meantime. I want the color, I want the smell, but I don't want the spray, the maintenance, the rest of it. So I have roses on my bank. Literally, there's one called Fragrant Spreader I have. It's probably 8 feet across right now, maybe 3.5 feet tall. And if you came by, you know, my place the 1st of March, it would be a little clump of green twigs about 8 inches out of the ground and a foot across. And then off it goes again and does the same thing every year. I mean, you can cut roses back quite a bit. Now, you may want that plant to eat up some more room. You know, don't prune it as much. That would be your choice. But very, very easy plants to prune, literally.
I know you talked a little bit about dogwoods, but what if they still haven't dropped their leaves? Do you wait till they drop their leaves before you?
You know, again, we always try to time this class for, you know, after frost, whatever you want to call it. You know, we're kind of in the middle of fall here, not quite the winter till the holidays. But, you know, your yard's going to tell you if you're still hanging on to fall color leaves, things are still growing, not growing, but still hanging on for life. I wouldn't run out and prune today or tomorrow, or maybe it's a week or two. But this kind of kicks off this dormant season when you can just say, hey, sun's out today. I got some time. It's not too cold. Let me strap on my warm gloves, get my weapons out, and I can go start getting some of this knocked out here over the winter, so I'm a little bit ahead come springtime.
Can you talk briefly about pruning for tree peonies?
Tree peonies, I have one tree, and I have also Ito, the hybrid, in my own garden. I don't do a lot here in the fall. I clean up the foliage, maybe throw a little slug bait, some mulch down around it if I'm worried about winter. And then I'm walking out to the beginning of spring, and I'm going to look for those big, bright red buds that are coming out of the wood all over the place. And then I can remove a little bit of dead wood here and there if I get it. And then boom, I've got my plant right back.
What about a ceanothus?
Well, ceanothus is a great example. Again, I've tried to say it a few times. If I keep my leaves in the winter, I am not pruning this late in the season. So ceanothus is a great blue flowering shrub that blooms in May, June. So if I follow my rules, I'm never touching it late summer, fall, winter. I'm going to wait till spring, enjoy all of my blue flowers, and right when it's done blooming, do what you want to it.
What if it was kind of badly pruned in the past? Are there ways to help kind of get it back on track?
Yeah, I mean, you know, plants like that, you could probably cut it back. You know, again, if you don't care about the flower, you know, for the one season, you know, do it late March, 1st of April, and get a head start. You know, it's not going to hurt the plant. You wouldn't get much flower that one year, and then it would get bushy and grow. If you're trying to rejuvenate something like that, you know, I would always look for any dead, diseased wood. Get it out of there. If you've got dead wood, clean out all the center, get all that stuff out of there, and then look at what you have left, and maybe you head it back a little bit to get back to a bushier, fuller plant, and absolutely throw some fertilizer on that. So right coming out of winter, get some food down on those guys, because that will help you with that nice flush of spring growth and the plant look a little better.
What about the elderberry, the black lace elderberry?
You know, that's another one that would bloom on old wood. I have one in my yard. I like the flower. It's not the end of the world to me on that one. If I don't get the bloom, because I bought that plant because I want that spectacular foliage. So I don't really care if you go in the winter, or again, you could wait till after it blooms if you want to enjoy the flower first. But that's one I could do, honestly, a lot of things too. I've seen people head those back quite a bit and keep them a little bushier and lower. I wanted mine to kind of get some structure and turn into, you know, almost a small tree, about 8 or 10 feet tall. I've seen black lace elderberry 15 feet tall. It kind of depends on how you want to prune it out. But again, I don't care about the flower. You know, do it anytime here coming through the winter to early spring. Otherwise, if you want to enjoy those flat flowers, just wait till it blooms, and we would do it like early summer.
What about weeping birch?
Yeah, anything weeping, I mean, birch, beech, all that stuff is probably up to you, because pruning is going to dictate my shape. I can have something up and narrower. I can keep it lower and spreading. Weeping plants are probably on how you want it to look. there's not really any flower on birch. They get some cool catkins coming out of spring or coming out of winter, excuse me. But I would have at that in the winter, because a weeping tree, kind of like we talked about with the lace leaf maple, I tend to be so dense and thick, it's really hard to walk out in June and look at it and go, God, where do I start? I can't see any of the branches. But if I can get maybe with dormant season with no leaves, I can really look at it and again, thin some branches out, create some kind of interesting shape to it. And then I've got a much cooler specimen in my landscape.
Are there specific considerations you should take for dwarf Japanese maples?
Not necessarily. I mean, dwarf, I'm assuming we're not talking lace leaf. We've covered that. So if it was a dwarf little bushy guy, I would probably leave that up to your personal taste. I have a lot of maples in my yard. I'm a maple addict to most other plants. And some of the dwarf ones, again, thinning it out. I like my plants kind of left more natural with some structure to them. I have other people that would go out and almost shear them back into little thick balls. If that's your taste, it's not going to hurt the plant. But if you want, in my opinion, in the winter when I can see the wood, I would not so much look at the top. I'd look in the center and go, well, if I took this little branch out and that little branch out, I could open up the structure a little bit. Then I can stand back and say, okay, this one's out of whack. Let's cut you back a little bit and a little bit to even out the overall size of it.
And would that be true for all Japanese maples, sticking to that 1/3 rule?
Yeah, with maple, I would stick to the 1/3 rule. Again, for me, I tend to look at my maples twice a year. And I think it's on the sheet you've got at home as well. I'm looking in the winter on lace leaf, especially because I can't see it in the summer. But even on shrubs and upright trees and bigger specimens, I can look at the structure and the silhouette and remove, a crossing branch or something hanging too low, or open up the structure by thinning very easily. That's kind of phase one. It's really easy to thin out maples because they're not necessarily a blooming tree. So I always walk out in my yard when I'm enjoying things in June, late May, June, even early July, and I can look at my maple tree. It's 20 feet tall and go, wow, I love it. It's thick. It's blocking my neighbor's mess, or B, I'd rather see something for me in my yard that's got some structure and some air moving through it. So in the summer, I can grab my pole pruner and walk out there and climb and look up there and go, oh, let's take one out here and one out there and open that back up for the long term.
Shifting gears a little bit, you talked a lot about some of the products there on the PowerPoint. Are there ones that don't have copper in it for those that have like a water well near them and want to be conscious of that?
Yeah, I mean, you could use, it kind of smells a little bit, but old lime sulfur is still available as a different alternative to fungicide. Lime sulfur dormant spray is still around. You can find that. Again, if you did that once and then let your plant bloom, I'm not sure what plant she's asking about, but I could get a regular fungicide like Funginil. There's a lot of other options that we can use in the growing season as well to help control things. But if you're right on a creek or something, yes, please don't use copper. The one animal creatures that have issues with copper are mainly invertebrates in marine or freshwater environments. So we don't want to get a lot of copper in the water. So just pick a little bit different style, like the lime sulfur.
And do you want to use the horticulture oil and the Liquicop together at the same time?
I would rather have you do. We spent years. I've spent years, trying different things. Going back to my grandma, my parents, me in my yard. I like to save time. I think everybody wants to save time. And it's the one thing I found that I could take both of those things, put them in the same spray mixture. They work together and get everything done at once. Most other products I've seen over the years, it would be, let's go get our spray oil and spray that. And then we go pick this and we go back and spray it a second time. So a little bit of it's to save time. And that copper formulation, especially in the Liquicop, in the rainy time of year up here in the winter. I mean, let's all be honest, we got a lot of rain. That lasts longer to me, stuck to the tree, a little bit longer than most.
Can you talk about the best way to prune out suckers and what are the difference between that and the water shoots?
Well, suckers and water sprouts, typically suckers are coming off your root system. So certain plants are going to have them, other ones you'll never see. Water sprouts are up in the structure of the plant. So both I would remove, but a little bit different creatures. Um, I don't know if I have a magic answer for it. I mean, if we go back, let's take lilac. We've had some people asking about lilac. Lilac is a suckering shrub by nature. You're not going to change that fact. There's no way for me to tell you how to not make it happen. But what I do with mine is try to monitor it. I don't need to walk out every week, and cut suckers out of my plants, but I will typically check it early summer, late spring, early summer. And if I see stems coming out of the soil 5 feet away from my lilac, I'm going to try to get underneath into the soil and cut that out, not cut it off at ground level, not leave a stub. If I leave that, then it's just going to send two and grow twice as fast. So I'm going to try to get those cut out into the soil and keep it to a minimum. It's not going to end. I've got 3 60-year-old lilacs. We inherited it, and I love them. I'd never get rid of them, but I get suckers every year, and it's not going to change. There's a lot of plants that grow like that. Quince, barberry. We can go on and on of things that will sucker a little bit off the root system. Maybe it's the plant choice. If I've got areas where you could use something a little bit fuller that perhaps suckers. Again, I'm probably not going to have that type of thing sitting right next to my front door. I want something a little bit tidier for shape.
Can you talk about smoke tree? There's somebody that's got one that's just way too big, and they're wondering if they can basically take a chainsaw to it and just kind of hack a lot of it off.
Well, smoke tree, I can probably tell you, I would feel comfortable breaking the 1/3 rule. How's that for an honest answer? You could cut smoke tree back quite a bit. I kind of always chuckle when I hear smoke tree because you see them called smoke bush, smoke tree, smoke bush, smoke tree. That would be the pruning. You tell it to be a bush and it's a bush. You let it get up. I've seen smoke tree 25, 30 feet tall. So that kind of depends on how you want to prune. Those do bloom on old wood. And I don't know if the little puffy smoke flowers is the reason you have that. I think they're cool, but I have smoke tree because of the foliage. I want the color on the leaves. So I, as a gardener, would make a choice. I could care less if it flowers with maximum puffs of smoke every year. I want you down and controlled. So go ahead and prune out all you want and head it back. You'll have the foliage. You'll have a much more, I'm guessing what you want is the shape of your plant. You're just not going to probably have as much of those flowers next year.
What's the best way to get lichen off your trees?
That's another great question. Lichens and mosses, are the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to smile and chuckle as I say, whatever you're going to do, yes, oh, sweet, they're gone. And then you can have this same exact conversation next winter and you're going to have them back again. It's not the end of the world that you have them. I have a lot of people that don't want them on there. The winter is the only time you can really do anything about this. So at Sunnyside, if you came in here and you got a product called Moss Max, okay, just Moss Max made by Bonite, just like it sounds, but it's not the long granular Moss Max. It's a liquid. It's a potassium soap. So it comes in a liquid spray bottle. I can plug it on my hose and I can walk out and spray branches and twigs and the ground and other plants and get the moss and lichen off. It will not hurt things in the winter. I cannot do that next June. So when I have a plant that has no foliage on it, fruit trees is usually the one I get asked about the most, that I want to get the mosses off of there, walk out with the potassium soap and spray those areas here at some point in the winter. It will turn straw, yellow, brown, and it will die. But I'm just being brutally honest, by the time we get to the next wet season, the next winter, you're going to have probably the same thing back in there again.
We talked about hydrangeas, but do binding hydrangeas kind of fall under the same rules, or, especially one that's pretty established and took over a lot of space? Yep. When and how much can you cut back?
Well, the climbing hydrangeas, I will say this, you could never kill that thing. I mean, I could start one over at the ground and it's going to come off the roots and off it goes again. That's an old wood blooming hydrangea. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So you will not get your white lace cap flower come that next season, but it will grow like gangbusters and come back to the way it was. I've seen some hypothalamic hydrangeas. I think if you looked that plant up, it would tell you it would get like 80 to 100 feet. I mean, it just never stops unless you tell it to. So if it's covering up too much area, absolutely feel free to cut it back. You could cut it back substantially. On that kind of situation, I would say this, because I'm going from everything to nothing and essentially starting it over again. I would always attack those projects right at the end of winter. So don't go out and do it here in November or December or January. Wait till that first part of March. As we get closer to spring, I could take out all that wood and then have some immediate gratification as that little guy starts growing again, and it will start to fill in. I worry about, breaking the 1/3 rule here going into winter, because if I cut something way far back and we get cold, maybe it kills more of the wood because I've opened up some cuts, and then maybe I don't get it to come back quite as reliably.
When's the best time to prune wisteria?
Wisteria, another creature that grows too large. If you cut that in the winter, if I cut that hard back, kiss your flowers goodbye. And that's the one reason to have wisteria, is the spectacular fragrant flowers. So prune after bloom, absolutely. In the winter, what I would try to do, and we'll do it to ours here on the property, is get in there and cut out all that thin, wispy growth. That's going to do nothing again next year. So it's almost like, maybe you've got it covering whatever, an arbor or structure. You're probably not going to be able to get every little piece of wood out of there because those are pretty vigorous creatures, we'll say. But I can get in there and I can cut back some of that wispy young growth and leave the old wood. If my stem's coming up and I've got thicker wood branching out, I need to leave those old wood bud sections, because that's where all of my flower clusters are going to drop in March and April and May, the next season as they grow.
What's the best way to prune Nandina?
Nandina is an easy one. Sometimes if you've got the bushy ones, that's an easy shear plant. If you wanted to head shear them, that's fine. I don't like mine cut into a little box or anything, so I probably just do a little bit of, selective tip pruning on them. But again, evergreen, don't want to prune that stuff here in the winter. That's one we would absolutely hold off till the end of winter, early spring next year. We can cut it back, get the beautiful foliage to flush out, and then off we go for another season.
What about ferns?
Ferns, there's perennial ferns and there's evergreens. If we got perennial ferns, if yours are like mine, they've kind of almost already turned to snot a little bit, and I'm ready to scrape them up and put them in the compost for the winter. If I have sword fern, tassel fern, deer fern, the reason I want those in my yard is because I've got some presence in the winter. I've got evergreen fronds. I've got some foliage out. If I'm going to start those over or rejuvenate an evergreen type fern, I'm cutting that back into the crown. Come springtime, you'll see all the little fiddleheads coming out of the crown. I could almost take all the old leaves off and just let that fern start over again.
What about a honeysuckle that's developed some spots and leaf drop this past year? When should they prune and spray that?
Yep. Honeysuckle is another great question, because if you have honeysuckle, I'm just being brutally honest, you will always probably get a little bit of powdery mildew on honeysuckle up here. So if I had that this year, my number one thing is, again, cleaning up all the leaves as they drop, get it out of there. Don't leave it as mulch. That would be a great candidate to walk out with something like the Liquid Cop or a good dormant season fungicide to make sure I'm clean starting out next year. If I'm going to prune it back, honeysuckle will always grow. That's not an issue with honeysuckle. If you have it, you're probably laughing. The problem is, if I cut it back too hard, I may not get as much flower as I had the year before. So structure pruning, thin out dead wood if you can find it. Vines are hard because I've got a tangled, gnarly mess, whatever it's growing on, a post, a trellis, a house, an arbor. It's hard to look at it and go, oh, well, if I take this piece and that piece, a lot of times they're all wrapped around together. So I would always probably control it a little bit by heading back to the size of whatever structure you're growing it on. If you see some dead wood, thin it out of there and then get that spray on it so we start next year clean.
How and when do you prune a red contorted filbert?
Well, again, red contorted filbert, contorted filbert is one of my favorite plants for winter bloom. So again, knowing my yard, that plant is going to drop those real pretty catkins on it here end of winter. So I'm not going to go out and do a lot of heading back at all in the winter. I'm going to cut my blooms off. It's not going to hurt it again, but I want to enjoy the flowers. So I'm looking at not this, but into the center. Do I need to get some things thinned out, open it up a little bit, get some more structure to it? Or do I have a piece that's gone crazy off one side? Okay, well, let's get you headed back and even out my shape a little bit. But that's a great, you know, the reason I would buy that is because I wanted, it's a cool plant. Winter's got twisted twigs. I've got some cool leaves. I get the bloom in late winter. I'm not going to go out and do a lot of major pruning on that before I get to enjoy my flower.
Excellent. We've got 2 more questions before we wrap up. Japanese maple, when is the best time to transplant that from a pot?
Yeah, anytime transplant in the dormant season is ideal. I mean, honestly, if you know where you're going to put it and it's in a pot, I would get it in the ground like today. I mean, it's sunshine up here today and tomorrow. The earlier I can get stuff in here in the fall, yes, it's going dormant. You won't see any kind of growth. All that's easy. But if we had a little magic camera and we could watch underneath the soil, I think you would be surprised as a gardener how much root development here happens in the fall. We've got wet weather, soil's still fairly warm. And even if it's, as long as it's not frozen the ground, I would get it in there as soon as you can, let it get some roots on it. We're going to have a little happier plant come springtime, a little bit farther ahead.
Some of the things we've been talking about today tend to get really large. Do you have any tips on how to spray something, you know, a tree that's say 15 feet tall, or how to prune? Do you have any tips on how to go about that?
Well, larger stuff, again, if you don't want to hire it out, because I know arborists and some of that's a little spendy, you know, buy the pole pruner. That's a great tool to get you up there 15 feet into a tree very easily. As a homeowner, I think you could get most all your stuff in your yard, especially when it comes to fruit and things, with a good pole pruner. That would be phase 1. The spraying would be a number of different devices. I mean, I'm not, you know, I'll speak for my wife. She's not real happy to see me hanging off a ladder 12 feet in the air with 1 foot on one rung, and I'm about ready to break my neck. So, you know, get a good orchard ladder. Tends to be a lot more stable if you really need a good ladder versus a typical 4-rung one. I get an orchard ladder. I've got a tripod, and we've got ones I could get up 20 feet in the air and feel pretty safe, not falling out. I mean, that's a great ladder. Spraying, whether I get on a ladder to get up, there's all kinds of different spray devices. Typically, you can find what they would call a tree shrub sprayer that would compress the spray a little bit. So instead of just having a regular tank sprayer that I can only reach up so far, there's some hose end adapters available. I could put this on the end of my garden hose and be able to control the flow. And I've seen those, you know, getting up into that 15, 20, even 25 foot range if you do it right. Just be real careful. Excuse me, be real careful not to spray you. I mean, that's my one issue. Even if we use the most organic of organic, you don't want to drink horticultural oil. You don't want to spray your skin down with it. Get your bald head with it like mine. You want to stay. So gloves, if I'm getting something like that and I'm going up into the air, I'm going to have a mask on for sure, which everybody already does right now. So get yourself a good mask, some nice waterproof gloves, and wear, you know, some clothes out there. We don't want to soak anything of this into our regular skin. So be a little more careful.
We've covered a lot of ground today, but if for some reason your question didn't get answered, or, you know, a question pops up as you're doing your own projects at home, please feel free to email us. We're here and happy to help. Our email address is sunnyside@msn.com, or you can always give us a call. And then we hope to see you all back tomorrow for our hellebores class. And more so, we hope you get to come into the nursery, chat with us, and, you know, take advantage of the class discount. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody. Happy pruning.